Hi, my name's Richard Saunders. I'm one of the writers on Airgun Shooter magazine. I've also done some presenting on the Airgun show on YouTube, and I'm also fortunate to be a hunting advisor to Daystate, Brocock and MTC Optics. Now, if like me, you are bored and frustrated at not being able to get out and shoot at the moment, you've got a lot of time on your hands, and I thought I would fill some of that time by putting together this little video to talk about one of the questions that I get asked more than any other, and that is how do I go about getting my own hunting permission? Now, I don't have a magic answer for that question. I don't have a silver bullet, but I do have quite a few years of experience of trying to get my own permissions, and I thought that I would just pass on some of the things that I've learned through the years. Now, the first thing I always tell people is be prepared to kiss a lot of frogs. Now, by that I mean that you're going to get an awful lot of rejection and an awful lot of doors slammed in your face. Now, if you have an issue accepting rejection, and if you don't have a thick skin, then you're in for a rough ride. But if you do, then hopefully you're going to find that permission at some point. Now, the first thing I always say to people is that you need to get into the right mindset when you're seeking a permission. Now, by that I mean that it's very easy to think that farmers or landowners are only going to give you a permission by doing you a favour, and of course they are doing you a favour to an extent, but at the same time you're also giving them something. You are providing a means to control pests and vermin on their property for free. So don't ever lose sight of that. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about how you can go about finding leads for permissions in the first place. Now, the first thing to recognise is that there's an awful lot of different kinds of permissions. Farms are an obvious one. But there's also garden centres, plant nurseries, golf courses are another obvious one, but also there are football pitches, rugby pitches, training grounds that all suffer from pests. Anywhere that puts horses in a field is obviously a target, but also think about equestrian centres, cross-country centres, things like that, and also horse training facilities and stables. Now, you also need to think about how far you can travel. Now, obviously, if you haven't got a car, then you're going to have a bit of a problem, because moving anywhere on a bike or public transport with a gun is extremely difficult. But ask yourself, how far am I prepared to travel for a permission? You know, is it 10 miles, 20 miles, further than that? And kind of on a map, sort of draw a ring around that distance with you in the middle, and then try and work up a list of different potential venues. Now, obviously the internet is a fantastic source for that, but so too is just driving around and local knowledge and talking to friends and family as well. Now, when I'm building up that list, I try and get a list of email addresses, as well as phone numbers, because I've always found that an email approach, at least initially, has been the best, the most successful approach for me. And even if there is no email address and I have to start off with a phone call, by having written out my email, then I've got a good script for that call. So let's talk about what should go into your email. First thing to recognise is that the people you're sending them to get an awful lot of emails, and they probably get an awful lot of emails from people asking them if they can shoot on their land. So don't waffle, don't write huge chunks of text, just get to the point. Now, I always set my email out as a series of bullet points, and obviously the things that you put in there are going to vary from person to person. Personally speaking, you know I look like I'm only in my 20s, but I'm actually in my early 50s, believe it or not. And I always make a point of how old I am, because I like to think it conveys a sense of maturity. My kids think that my age means I'm an old git, but I think of it as a sign of maturity. I make the point that I've lived in the local area all my life, that I've worked for a local company, or a company that certainly has a good name locally. I talk about my experience as a shooter, obviously, and I also mention the references that I'm able to give. Now, I'm fortunate that because I already have permissions, I can offer my existing permission holders as references to new potential permission holders. I also talk about the fact that I'm insured. Now, I'm insured through the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, BASC, and I always make the point that, look, if you let me on your land, I will have insurance to cover any issues that arise. I always talk about the fact that I notify the police before I go, and when I return from a shooting session. And I also talk about the gear that I use and its suitability in terms of not scaring livestock and bloodstock and what have you. Now, I'll be honest, it's very, very rare, literally 1 or 2 times, that I've ever got a reply back to that email, either positive or negative. More likely is that you're going to have to plan a follow-up phone call, and I always give it about a week and then I make that phone call. Again, you need to be to the point, don't waffle on, and I always say, hi, sorry to call you out of the blue. I sent you an email a week or so ago about pest control on your farm, and I wondered if you had a minute or 2 spare to talk about that further. And to be perfectly honest, those 10 seconds probably will determine whether you're wasting your time and their time, or whether you're onto a winner. Because often a farmer or landowner will say either yes, let's talk further, or no, I'm not interested, straight away. Now, if they say that they're not interested, don't push it. Okay, it's highly unlikely you're going to change their mind unless you're the world's greatest salesperson. Certainly, for absolute sure, you don't want to be rude, because these guys, they talk to each other, and if you end up in a row with one farmer, then it's highly likely that he's going to pass on his experience, his bad experience with you, to other farmers and landowners who may be potential permission holders for you. So I always just say, sorry to have bothered you. Look, if the situation should change at any time in the future, you've got my details, please get in touch, and then I leave it at that. Now, if you strike lucky, and the farmer says, well, in actual fact, yeah, I do have a bit of an issue with rabbits or pigeons or whatever, don't get giddy, don't kind of get all gushy and excited. This is where talking about this mindset comes in. You need to keep it professional, and bear in mind that you need to be reinforcing to that landowner that you are a potential solution to the issue that they're facing. And your objective from that point on is to agree to meet up in person so that you can discuss the topic further. Now, let's talk about that happy day when you get to stand in front of a potential permission owner, and the way to conduct yourself in that conversation. Now, it's worth pointing out that human nature is such that we're all cautious deep down, and wary. And don't forget that you're asking someone permission to go and someone that you don't know, for permission to go and walk around their property, probably at night, on your own with a loaded weapon. So you're making a pretty big ask of someone that doesn't know you. So what you need to do is everything that you say and do and conduct yourself needs to be breaking down that kind of natural reluctance to engage with you. Now, golden rule number 1, absolutely golden rule number 1, is to turn up on time. If you turn up late, then that conveys subconsciously or consciously an image of you as being an unreliable person to the landowner. So even if you have to park around the corner for 20 minutes and sit in your car, make sure you're on time. Now, you need to dress smartly as well. Now, I don't mean that you need to turn up in a collar and tie, but you certainly don't want to turn up in full camo looking like you've just crawled out of a bush. Comb your hair, have a shave, and wear clothing, clean clothing that is appropriate to the environment that you're going to be going into. Now, when you get into that conversation, one of the first things I always bring up is insurance and the Basque insurance that I have. And I take a copy of that insurance in a little folder, along with hard copies of letters from, reference letters from landowners that I'm prepared to leave behind for the landowner. Now, as I said before, if you've already got a permission, getting a reference from that permission holder is like gold. If you don't have a pre-existing permission, then think about other people that you could get personal references from. You know, if you're a youngster and you can get a letter from a teacher or a tutor, that's great. If, like me, your school days are way beyond you or way behind you, then think about a letter from someone at work, a senior manager, director at the place that you work, for example. The key is that your reference has to be from someone who is in a position of responsibility. It can't obviously just be your best mate down the pub kind of thing. Now, I always take with me a gun and some specialist gear, but I leave it in the car. Now, the reason I do that is that sometimes landowners, they're interested in the guns that you're going to use. Sometimes they express a concern that guns might frighten livestock or bloodstock. And just if you have that gun in the boot, you can say, well, look, I've got a gun with me, and you can show them how quiet they are by dry firing it into the ground. And if you take along some specialist gear like night vision stuff or thermal gear, then again it conveys that you are serious about your sport. You know, you've got all the toys, therefore you know what you're doing. Now also, I always find it's best to rehearse or think about the questions I'm likely to be asked, and it's even worth just taking 5 minutes somewhere quiet and out loud rehearsing those answers. It means talking to yourself like I am in my garage right now, but it will help you in the long run. And in addition to answering questions, be prepared to ask lots of questions. This is your opportunity, the main opportunity to convey this sense of professionalism and responsibility. So ask about their business, ask about what crops they grow, what livestock they keep. Ask about the seasonality of their business as well. Ask about the pest issues that they face. Are there any particular issues that they prioritise at certain times of the year? Are there any parts of the farm that are a particular problem from pests? Also ask about work patterns and work times. Are there going to be staff on the site who work in shifts? What time are those shifts? Are there any particular times of the day where you just cannot shoot because it's going to be busy? That kind of thing. Ask about public access. Are there footpaths? Are there bridleways on the permission? Think about that, and also ask about dog walkers. Do people walk their dogs on their farm, even if they're not supposed to? Do people walk dogs on the farm? If you can, find out if anyone else shoots on the farm, because obviously you're going to need to coordinate so you don't get in each other's way. But equally, if you are able to find out if someone used to shoot on the land and no longer does, and you can find out why they no longer shoot, then that gives you a good indication as to something to look out for in the future, so you don't fall into the same pitfall. I also ask about what process the landowner wants me to follow every time I shoot. Do they want a text from me? Do they want a phone call? Do they want an email? Do I need to wait for them to acknowledge before I go shooting? That kind of thing. I also explain that every time I go shooting I call the police 101 phone number, and I ask the landowner if they want me to give them a copy of the reference number that the police give you, in case they get a call from a concerned member of the public. Again, it's just all about knocking down those barriers of being perceived as someone who can be trusted. And that's pretty much it. As I say, it's not a surefire, guaranteed formula to work, but it's worked for me many times in the past. Now, once you've got your permission, of course, the next trick is to make sure that you keep your permission. But that's probably a subject for another video, another day.